Hey BoLS fans, what's up? JayArr here, and today we are taking a look at Blue Rose. This is the new version of Blue Rose, put out by Green Ronin Publishing. This is powered by their adventure game engine and is in a sweet, beautiful blue collector's edition tome. You can see they've got the blue and gold theme going on here, including gold embossed pages, which is pretty swanky. Also in this book, which fell out earlier, but here I have it for you guys, there is a sweet, sweet map, both one of the city of Aldous in the Kingdom of the Blue Rose, and then a map of the world, at least as we're focusing on in Blue Rose. The book is gorgeous, full color, as an adventure game engine book, which is Green Ronin's sort of in-house role-playing game engine. It has everything you need to play, including a player section, a world and lore section, and the GM, or narrator in this case, section, along with a monster manual and a sample adventure, because it wouldn't be a core role-playing starter book if it didn't give you at least one adventure to start running through. Now, Blue Rose is a game of romantic fantasy, which is a different version of fantasy adventures than you might be used to. High fantasy might be the works of like Tolkien, darker fantasy like Fritz Leiber, or stuff you might be familiar with if you've read any of the Black Library novels. Romantic fantasy, on the other hand, is sort of from the mid to late 80s and on. Think authors like Mercedes Lackey, Tamara Pierce, things like the Dragon Riders of Pern and Acorn of the Unicorn Girl. Places where the heroes are kind of environmentally conscious, where the stories are more about protecting people and places, overcoming corruption, and dealing with relationships and bonds, and sort of a more mythic take on magic than in most traditional kind of fantasy stuff. It's a game that is about relationships and feelings and intimacy, as well as having high adventure on the high seas or the rolling plains or wherever it is you decide to play. As I mentioned, this is powered by the adventure game engine, which means that one of the most important things to this game are going to be stunts. That's going to be how you do the cool things that your character does. It also means that it's going to be a very customizable sort of game, as you'll see when we get to the player section. In the Blue Rose, it's a game where you have not the standard like fantasy, elves, dwarves, halflings, that sort of thing, but instead you have different kinds of humans. You also have night people, who are basically the half-orcs. You have the Raidan, who are sentient, talking, thinking, magical animals. Like I said, romantic fantasy. You can play as a bear, a cat, a wolf, a dolphin, a horse. So if there's an animal that you've been itching or interested in playing, this is the game for you to do that. You can also bond with other characters because of that. And then, of course, you've got your sea elves or sea folk. And then your people that are touched by magic and shadow, and who have their own, there's got to be something for the people that just want to be brooding heroes sitting around feeling bad about things. Now, as I said, this is an adventure game engine system. It has only 3 classes. There's the Adept, which are the magic users. You have the Expert, which are the skill monkeys and or rogues. And then, of course, you have the Warriors, who are the fighters. You can kind of mix and match how you level up, because the adventure game engine runs off of talents and stunts. These are abilities that let you, cast spells, knock people down when you're fighting, and do all kinds of other things. It's a more free-form system, but you do have like a base class that starts you off and makes it easier for you to pick things as you go up. Every class, as we'll see later, has its own specialization. But what I really like is that in the character creation setting system stuff, it has a lot to inform the game. It helps you kind of, any role-playing game should skew you towards the kind of stories it's going to tell, and this one talks a lot about like relationships, feelings, goals, and of course we've got corruption. Evil manifests itself very physically in Blue Rose, and corruption and trucking with demons and all of that sort of stuff carries with it a very real penalty and a physical consequence and a magical consequence, and redemption arcs are a huge part of it, as is kind of giving into corruption for a little while and, you know, being dark and brooding and evil, but then getting over it. And they've got mechanics for that. They've also got this, I love this relationship system where it sets up what your bonds are, and it has like mechanical reinforcements to reinforce and make you act on those things and think about how they work. Who are you connected to? A relationship doesn't have to be a positive thing. It could be a negative thing. You could have a bond with a rival or a hated enemy, but it's sort of that one, like that grudge that you can't let go of, you know? There's also rules, optional rules for a more self-centered relationship if you want to play a loner. But I just like that they've got that relationship web kind of considered. As I said, talents are a huge part of it. These are, it's a combination of all of like your skills and your spells and everything. It's a huge section. We're not going to go through it page by page, but I do want to show off some of the different specializations. These are like prestige classes, or if you've played like Dragon Age or Mass Effect or games like that, they're the specialization options that you would layer on to something like, you know, the fighter or the thief. For instance, you might be a berserker or a champion or a duelist or a healer or an outrider or a shaper. There's all kinds of different options in here. You can see pages of different options, and then we get into Arcana, which is the magic focused talent of all of this stuff. It has rules for how you wield this power, what you can do with it. There's, you know, it's its own subsystem, but it basically runs off of different talents and different stunts, and there's a wide variety of magic. It's not just what you're going to do to fight in combat, but there's a lot of role-playing oriented spells as well. And of course, ironically, as I talk about that, we're getting into Sorcery, which is sort of like the dark magic, which is all about mind control and killing people. So let's maybe move on. that's for the bad guys and the brooding heroes. It also has a guide to the history of the world of Aldea. It's got its own interesting conflicts. Again, this book is all about relationships and love and romantic fantasy, which means that there's a lot of talk about, you know, what that looks like in the game. The royal court of Aldis, for instance, is ruled by a queen, and it talks about like her council and her court and how your characters might find favor with her. It also talks about how she's got like special knights that protect her, and then it gets a lot into what the life and culture is like in Alden, and this is one place where they very deliberately taken some issues of our day and age and looked at how they would manifest themselves in this game of romantic fantasy, because any world is supposed to mirror what's informing us. We've got a section on gender, romance, and marriage. In Blue Rose, same-sex marriage is just, it's a normal thing. It's a bond that can happen, at least in Blue Rose. In Aldea, there are other kingdoms where it's not as welcome or accepted or open, and they're typically the bad guys. Same with like gender and agendered or non-binary folks or transgendered folks who have like a way to transition through physical surgery or alchemy or magic. People who of all kinds of sexuality, pansexual, bisexual, people who are asexual even. There's a lot of that. That's a big part of romance. That's a big part of this game as well. You also get a section on what the religions of the world are like. Gods are super important in romantic fantasy. Prophecy and destiny is a huge part of everything. There's always some prophecy at work here or some like omen. And then as you go through the kingdom settings, you can see how big this world is, how well thought out it is. You can see the lands outside of the Kingdom of the Blue Rose. And then, of course, we get into the storyteller section where they talk about the different kinds of stories that you can tell, different ways to handle romance between heroes and NPCs, and just between NPCs. There's some great advice in there on how to handle and set up intrigue, which is a big part of this kind of game, including how to mess with mysteries, even though you're in a game where people have psychic powers, can read the future and all that stuff. It also talks about like how to, get your game going and different kinds of campaigns that you can run, which is one section that I really like No matter what you're playing, seeing what other people is doing is always great, because you know, like, okay, I'm going to steal some of these tropes. They've got guides for swashbuckling and high romance. They've got my favorite, they call them series here. My favorite series framework is For Aldous and the Queen, which is kind of you are like the Three Musketeers, but in Blue Rose, and you are sent off to go do things. On the Road is your typical adventuring story where you're just wandering around. A Game of Thorns is not about winter approaching, but it is about political intrigue and wars that may or may not involve roses. You also have an Old Republic to play in, if you're interested in that sort of thing. You have this like sort of interesting look at how to play events from the history of Blue Rose, or if you want to play in like a sort of post-apocalyptic blasted wasteland, they've got that in here as well. There's all kinds of interesting stuff, including a series that is designed to play into characters with disabilities, which is a cool option that you don't really see, but called the Quiet Knights. They are heroes that are either blind or deaf or both, or they might be knights that have other specific disabilities, but blindness and deafness are the big ones that they play here, and they talk about how they function in the world. They also have the Wedding Planners series, which is you go around and make romance happen. You're matchmakers, you're wedding planners, and when everything goes awry, you're the ones that will save the day. Then it talks about like basic rules. It's got some sample monsters, sample treasures, all the usual stuff. A few interesting things. If you like the adventure game engine, Blue Rose is a great game to play. If you think that the adventure game engine has a little too much flexibility or can get in the way of what you want to do, Blue Rose is still a great source book. I like it. It's a cool, interesting world. It came out like 20 years ago under the D20 system, and now it's neat to see it updated once again. There are a few expansions out now. It seems like Green Ronin is pushing more of it, so be sure and check back for more on that. In the meantime, this has been Blue Rose. I'm JayArr from the BoLS Souls. Thanks for watching.